The fluorescent lights of the supermarket buzzed faintly overhead, casting a cold glow over the long checkout lines that stretched across the aisles. In one of them stood Daniel, a young single father with weary eyes and calloused hands, clutching a small pack of diapers and a carton of milk. His toddler, Emma, rested heavily on his shoulder, her golden curls falling across his chest as she dozed off, unaware of the quiet storm raging inside her father's heart. Daniel had been working double shifts at a local garage, trying to make ends meet ever since his wife had passed away 2 years earlier. Life had been a relentless struggle, a cycle of bills, childcare, and exhaustion, but tonight felt heavier than usual. He reached into his worn leather wallet and counted the crumpled bills and coins that represented the very last of his money. Just enough for the diapers, barely. As the cashier scanned the items, his stomach tightened, praying the total wouldn't exceed the fragile balance he had. Behind him, shoppers shifted impatiently, tapping their feet and glancing at their watches. Daniel felt the weight of their stares like 1,000 invisible judgments. He swallowed hard, forcing a smile for Emma even though his eyes betrayed the fear of a father running out of options. To him, this wasn't just a late-night grocery run, it was the quiet battlefield of survival. The air grew heavier as the cashier announced the total, and Daniel hesitated, realizing he didn't have enough for both items. His hand trembled as he slid the diapers forward, whispering to himself that Emma's needs always came first. Daniel's chest tightened as the cashier cleared her throat, her voice echoing louder than it should have in the quiet of the store. "Sir, you're short by $2, she said, her tone professional but tinged with sympathy. The world seemed to blur for a moment as Daniel stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. $2, such a small amount, yet an impossible gap when you had nothing left. He thought about putting the milk back, but the thought of Emma waking up tomorrow without breakfast made his stomach knot. His pride screamed at him not to beg, not to explain his situation to strangers who wouldn't care, but his father's heart begged for a miracle. He ran a hand across his face, exhaustion sinking deep into his bones, and with a heavy sigh he whispered, "Just the diapers, then." The cashier nodded quietly, removing the milk, and began to rescan. That was when Daniel felt the presence of someone behind him, tall, confident, and silent. The line had grown restless, people shifting from foot to foot, but this man's stillness stood out. Daniel didn't turn at first, shame had already wrapped itself around him like a chain. But then, from behind him, a voice spoke. Calm, steady, and filled with an authority that seemed out of place in the humdrum chaos of a grocery store. "I'll take them all," the voice said firmly. Daniel froze, his mind scrambling to understand if he had heard correctly. Slowly, he turned to see a well-dressed man with sharp eyes softened by kindness, his hand already reaching for his own wallet. The stranger's gaze met Daniel's, and in that moment, something inside him whispered that this night was about to change everything. Daniel blinked, unsure if his tired mind was playing tricks on him. "Excuse me," he asked quietly, his voice cracking from both disbelief and the weight of exhaustion. The stranger stepped closer, offering a warm yet determined smile. "I said, I'll take them all. The diapers, the milk, anything else you need. Put it on my card." The cashier looked between the two men, her eyebrows lifting in surprise, waiting for confirmation. Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. Pride and years of struggling alone had trained him never to accept handouts, never to show weakness. I can't let you do that," he stammered, clutching Emma closer to his chest as if shielding her from his own vulnerability. But the stranger didn't waver. "It's not about what you'll let me do," he said gently. "It's about what's right. Sometimes, life knocks us down so hard that standing alone isn't possible. Let me help." His words carried a sincerity that disarmed Daniel's defenses, and for a moment, he simply stood there, caught between gratitude and shame. Emma stirred in his arms, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists before murmuring, "Daddy, home?" Her innocent voice cracked open the fragile wall Daniel had built around himself. The stranger glanced at the little girl and smiled softly, almost wistfully, as if reminded of something buried deep within his own heart. Without another word, he handed his sleek black card to the cashier, nodding firmly. "Everything they need, and then some," he instructed. The sound of the card swipe felt like the release of a breath Daniel hadn't realized he'd been holding. Around them, the impatient murmurs of the line quieted, replaced by a silence thick with awe. The cashier bagged the items quickly, her eyes softening as she handed the bags across the counter. Daniel stood frozen, his arms tightening around Emma while his mind raced to process the stranger's kindness. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice rough. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." The man adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket, pausing as though searching for the right words. "Because I know what it feels like to be in your shoes," he said quietly. "Once, a long time ago, I was standing exactly where you are now, broke, scared, and holding on to the only thing that mattered to me. Someone stepped in for me then, and it changed my life. Tonight, it's my turn." Daniel's throat tightened, emotion swelling until he could hardly breathe. He wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small compared to the magnitude of the moment. Emma, sensing the heaviness in her father's silence, reached out toward the stranger with her tiny hand, babbling something that sounded like, "Thank you." The man's stern features softened further as he gently touched her hand with his finger, his eyes misting for just a second before he quickly blinked it away. The interaction was so simple, yet so profound, that Daniel felt his heart ache. The line of customers that once seemed impatient now watched quietly, some smiling, others clearly moved. In that ordinary grocery store, under harsh fluorescent lights, something extraordinary was unfolding, a reminder that compassion still existed in a world that so often felt cold and indifferent. For Daniel, the moment became more than charity, it was a spark of hope he thought he had lost forever. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Daniel balanced the grocery bags in one hand while holding Emma close with the other. The stranger walked beside him, unhurried, as though this meeting had been meant to happen all along. For a while, silence lingered between them, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft cooing of Emma as she drifted back into sleep. Finally, Daniel turned, his voice low but urgent. "I don't even know your name. At least let me thank you properly." The man smiled, extending his hand. "Michael. Michael Turner." Daniel shook it firmly, noticing the strength in his grip, yet also the gentleness. "Thank you, Michael," Daniel said, his eyes glistening. "You don't know what this means to us. I was at the end of my rope tonight." Michael studied him carefully, his gaze filled not with pity but with respect. "You're stronger than you realize," he replied. "The fact that you're still standing, still fighting for her, says everything about the kind of father you are." The word struck Daniel deeper than he expected, loosening the knot of failure that had weighed on him for so long. He nodded, unable to find more words, and Michael continued softly, "This world tries to convince us that we're alone, but we're not. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us." For the first time in months, Daniel felt seen, not as a failure or a burden, but as a father doing his best. The night seemed brighter somehow, as though the stars themselves had leaned closer to witness the quiet exchange of humanity between two men who, only minutes before, had been strangers. Daniel loaded the last of the bags into his beat-up car, pausing as he tucked Emma into her car seat. She stirred softly, clutching the carton of milk as if it were a treasure, her small face peaceful under the glow of the streetlight. He closed the door gently and turned to find Michael still standing there, his hands in his pockets, his eyes thoughtful. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," Daniel said honestly, his voice steadier now, carrying both gratitude and humility. Michael shook his head with a quiet smile. "Don't repay me. Pass it on. One day, you'll see someone standing where you were tonight. That's your moment to be the hand that lifts them up." His words landed deep in Daniel's soul, planting a seed that he knew would never die. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two men bound by a shared understanding of struggle and kindness. Then Michael gave a small nod, turned, and walked toward a sleek car parked nearby. Only as he opened the door did Daniel notice the emblem, luxury, expensive, a vehicle far beyond his own imagination. He realized then that Michael wasn't just kind. He was someone powerful, someone who had climbed to heights Daniel couldn't even dream of yet remained grounded enough to see those still at the bottom. As Daniel drove away, he whispered a prayer of thanks, not just for the groceries, but for the reminder that humanity wasn't lost. In that single act of compassion, Michael had given him more than food or diapers, he had given him hope. And as Emma murmured, "Daddy, happy," in her sleep, Daniel finally believed they would be.